Young Washington basically uses the form and structure of a musician's biopic or an inspirational sports movie. It's all about celebrating the people, or in this case, person, at center stage. An early 20s George Washington. Everything good and bad about the movie comes down to this. So, as a result of my genius, I have chosen to structure this review into two sections. Good and bad.
Sometimes I stagger even myself with my genius.
The good. I am a grad student studying history, including this time period, but more on the British side, ironically. As well as a teacher, and funny enough, just a few months ago, I was teaching this exact series of incidents from the mid-1700s. And if you don't know, a 20-something-year-old George Washington basically sparks an early World War by trying to kick the French out of Pittsburgh. And this is basically the plot of the movie, and I think it covers these events pretty well. As far as historical accuracy goes, there's a few different ways you could look at this, like, are the little details right? Are the plot events generally correct? Are the characters where they're supposed to have been? And as far as, like, the big stuff, like the sequence of events, the characters involved, Young Washington, it's not a Robert Eggers movie, right? But it's pretty good. It's not reading off a wiki page, and it's better than The Patriot in that regard, which is a great movie. I love that movie, but it's, like, kind of made up. There's a decent level of detail. I'm not an expert in colonial social history, so I can't say much about, like, costumes and sets. But I think it's pretty convincing to someone who doesn't know a ton, and more importantly, for a movie of this scale, it doesn't feel cheap. Because this is a movie with a very lean budget from a new and controversial studio, I'm especially impressed with the action scenes. I like the tactics on display and the level of grit and tension they achieve. The stunts are all pretty top-notch, and it never feels like they're holding back or anything, despite being kind of bloodless. It's cool to see British regulars, Virginia militia, and native tribes all use different tactics and fighting styles. By far, I'd say, the best part of the movie is William Franklin Miller as the man himself. He's perfectly towering, but also kind of awkward, and he's, like, charming and charismatic. And I think he's pretty convincing in the action and the more dramatic scenes. I think his performance is the best in the movie, honestly. Especially considering the material he's working with. More on that in the bad section. Andy Serkis and Ben Kingsley are the two, like, biggest names in this, and they get to do some fun stuff. I wonder if Kingsley just took the role to do whatever accent he's doing here, and Andy Serkis just hams it up, and he's a lot of fun. The other performances range from good to meh. There are none that I'd say are outright bad. Once again, Young Washington feels quote-unquote inspirational in a way that I think a lot of people, especially the so-called middle-of-the-country audiences, will actually really like. This movie takes a really positive view of Washington and his actions here, and it derives some positive, like, messages and moral lessons and whatever. Washington is forced to reckon with his lower status as both a colonist and a lesser member of the gentry, and he's fighting for the freedom to assert himself. He makes some serious blunders militarily and has to figure out how to recover from them. He demonstrates that his worth as a commander comes from the love he has for his men and for the land. None of it's all that deep, and it's not trying to be deep, it's really just trying to be uplifting. I'll have more to say on this, but overall, I generally like how they treat and depict Washington. It's nice to see him as a more vulnerable, like, intense young man than the stately grandfather we usually get from him and you see on the dollar bill. It humanizes him in a way that's really stuck with me since I've seen it. I think it's a very positive but not unfair characterization. I think that aspect is going to bug the more critical members of the audience, and especially those who aren't part of that quote-unquote middle America audience. However, this was a nice reminder that, well, there's a whole audience that Hollywood has sort of abandoned. I saw this movie with family and family friends who I'd say generally fit that description, and it made me remember that I, a terminally online Zoomer, would-be critic, and student historian, am not the end-all be-all of audiences. There are millions of people who don't go into a movie playing critic. They just want something decent and interesting, and, you know, movies that present something new or celebrate something that's just worth celebrating. On that note, I hope this movie does well enough to show Hollywood that there is, and always has been, an audience for low or mid-budget fun movies. It feels like a lot of the industry has been torn between smaller art films or smaller feeling art films, or gigantic corporate slop. Since the rise of cinematic universes and the sequel remake craze, the category of movie that Young Washington falls into, I think, has just fallen through the cracks. Either these movies don't get made, or they just go direct to streaming without raising much awareness. Angel Studios, though like I said, it's controversial, seems to be angling to bring this genre back. There's a lot of ads for upcoming Angel Studios movies that all seem to fit into this mid-budget kind of feeling. And I'm kind of rooting for it. So in this patriotic season with like the World Cup and the 250th anniversary, I'm inclined to give this movie a lot of grace. Keep that in mind, because right now I'm going to discuss the bad. Though I was just saying the inspirationalness of this movie was a good thing, I also think it holds it back in many ways. The characters all fit into the feel-good movie trope characters. You've got the young protagonist who makes some mistakes, but they're framed as pretty forgivable mistakes and ultimately triumphs. The tense but ultimately supportive family members. The well-meaning friend who catalyzes the hero to action at a crucial moment. The love interest. The antagonistic authority figures who constantly remind the hero that he'll never make it. The helpful authority figure who respects the hustle. And the authority figure who comes around in the end. That kind of thing. And they all acted and talked as such. Besides the love interest, which is true to history and therefore ends kind of not well, everyone is pretty stock standard. Much like a musician's biopic usually downplays the more controversial or messy aspects of the hero, this movie is especially generous to Washington. His actions in the Jumonville affair, where that's the battle in the woods where the French officer is killed, and Fort Necessity, may not have been so understandable as the movie depicts. The movie attributes his blunders to a mix of accidents and stress, I think. But there's definitely a reading, and in my opinion, a more likely reading, of a very inexperienced and honestly just pretty arrogant young guy who screws up massively and starts a massive international war. So huge that historians call the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, the unofficial First World War. Few movies have the courage to go the Raimi Spider-Man 3 route by making the hero not just flawed, but like the worst, like actually kind of evil before bringing them back up again. And I think that might have been good here. The dialogue felt very amateur in places, honestly in all places, and unless the performance was good enough to save it, in the case of Franklin Miller or Serkis or Kingsley or the guy who plays General Gage, it was all very on the nose. The best comparison I have is that it felt like the dialogue in a YA novel, if you've read any of those. It's very overt, it's trying too hard to be profound, or trying too hard to be witty or funny or cool. Characters are so transparent about the themes of the movie, or the purpose of their character, or the stakes of the scene, or of foreshadowing how Washington will change the system and quote-unquote take the king. There's a lot of unnecessary repetition that just feels like it's trying to beat you over the head with it. They also use dialogue to show class divides and social standings that wouldn't really need to be stated at this point in history, the kind of thing where it's like, they're just trying to talk to the audience, the characters should already know this kind of thing. Like, how many times do we need to be reminded that the British think the colonists are losers? I get that it's trying to communicate historical realities with limited tools, but show don't tell is still a pretty good rule of thumb. And there are other ways to do this, even if you're gonna do it in the dialogue. This is a problem across the Angel Studios films I've seen, by the way. Then, of course, the movie uses AI. There are definitely one or two shots I noticed where that were just definitely 100% AI generated, and several that I suspect were AI enhanced. I just hate AI, so it pissed me off. Pessimistically, though, I think this is the way a lot of studios must have already been going without disclosing it, and will continue to go. I guess the best defense of the use of AI in this movie is that if you're going to use it to enhance shots, extend lines of troops, put a city on a coastline where it's not, fine. I don't think it replaces any performance in any given scene, but who's to say? I guess it's not that much of a stretch from computer animation. But I don't want to get into the business of justifying AI because no studio is going to have any limiting principles, nothing that tells them to stop, especially a small company working with relatively small budgets. AI is like The Ring. It's like you think you can use it to do good, but probably not. Like I said, this is a movie I'd like to succeed for a lot of reasons, but this is something I detest. The shots I noticed it in just weren't even that necessary, so why? And as much as this movie isn't political, unless the statement George Washington is a cool guy is political, Angel Studios has political enemies that will use this to smear the entire thing. And the movie at most is just pretty good, so I don't know if it will be able to weather that storm. In the end, Young Washington is basically a win. I'd go see it in theaters if I were you, and once again, I hope it signals to the traditional studios that there's room for mid-budget and historical movies, about events that aren't World War II. The thing that sticks with me most is just the depiction of Washington as an eager but turbulent kid with the weight of the world on his shoulders. He's ambitious, but he's out of his depth. He's trying to figure out his principles. And I think it does affect how you view Washington for the better. It rounds out his character in your imagination, and it just makes him more human, which is good because I think for most of us, especially Americans, George Washington exists as a kind of very stoic statue in our collective imagination. I hope Franklin Miller gets more work after this. And in a time where, thanks to the World Cup and the anniversary and the 4th of July, I think we're all feeling a bit more patriotic, or we feel like we've been given permission to be more patriotic. I think this is the right movie at the right time. But what did you think? Please let me know in the comments down below. I love having these discussions. It's been a while since I put out a video, so I'm excited to get back into it. Thanks, and God bless.